My name is Alan Park. I am a compliance and systemic manager for the Housing Ombudsman. So my team looks at compliance with our complaint handling code that many of you will be familiar with, but also we carry out systemic investigations both into landlords where we feel there is a systemic issue that needs investigated, but also into thematic issues. And one such thematic issue that we looked into was damp and mold. So now I'm going to share my screen and hopefully that all goes smoothly and you can see some slides. Do let me know if you can't. We issued a damp and mold report over a year ago now, called It's Not Lifestyle. And as I say, it's the aim of our work to kind of share the insight and learning from our complaints. And we had identified through our casework, through the things that were coming through to the Housing Ombudsman, that there was an issue with damp and mold and the way that damp and mold was being handled within the sector. This predates ITV documentaries. It predates a lot of what has happened, obviously, over the last few months. And it is a timely reminder that complaints are an excellent way of finding emerging issues that your residents are experiencing. If you can channel the learning and the knowledge from complaints, then you can identify what are the thematic issues coming through. And that's what my team does. And that's what happened with damp and mold. So we look to identify those themes and those trends and use complaints as a positive to hopefully make sure that when something's gone wrong, it doesn't happen again. We've talked a lot about the damp and mold report, so I don't intend to go over the kind of background and history for it, but what we did identify with the damp and mold report was that there was a change in culture that was needed with damp and mold. And we found some themes running through all of the kind of cases that we saw, all of the kind of receipt when we got things back from calls for evidence that we carried out amongst the sector. We found that it was a very reactive approach to damp and mold. We found that landlords were waiting for the phone to ring for somebody to say they had a problem with damp and mold. And what we recommended within the report was a more proactive approach. And what does a proactive approach look like? I'm going to come on to in a bit. But what we wanted was not so much waiting for those reports of damp and mold, but being aware that it's going to happen and trying to get on the front foot. The report was called It's Not Lifestyle because we saw a culture of inferring blame on residents as a default. And so the instinctive response that we saw within the sector was one of asking the resident, well, are you drying your clothes on a radiator? Have you opened a window? And not looking at some of the more deeper lying root causes of what was causing the damp and mold, and almost not even taking account of those and just taking account of the residents' actions. It was a very resident focused approach to damp and mold, as opposed to what we wanted to see, which was more of a fabric focused. So what is the building telling you? What is the buildings of similar types telling you? That proactive approach to try and get you on the front foot when it comes to damp and mold. And across the sector, we saw a fatalism towards damp and mold, that an acceptance that we have a housing stock that is susceptible to damp and mold problems, and we just have to kind of say we deal with it and we'll manage it. But ultimately, there's not much we can do about it. And what we wanted to see was that zero tolerance approach to damp and mold, so that organizations were really, as I say, being proactive, taking responsibility, looking at their stock and saying, how can we do our very best to make sure that someone is not suffering from the impact of damp and mold, rather than focusing on the residents' actions, focusing on the actions that you can take as a landlord to try and hopefully eradicate or manage as best you can recurring damp and mold problems. And what we really wanted to see, as I say, across it was a culture change. And one resident we spoke to when we did the report, spoke of a culture of not caring, this acceptance of damp and mold. And what we wanted to see was much more a kind of empathetic approach to damp and mold and seeing how best it could be addressed. So how did we recommend that you go about doing that? In terms of the proactive approach, what we wanted to see was this kind of diagnosis of finding your silence is what we caused it. And this was that, we see issues coming through complaint systems, but what we wanted to see was landlords looking at where should we be hearing from and where are we not hearing from. So that could be through, advertising campaigns, that could be through proactive communication, making it all right for somebody to get in touch and talk about the issues that they're facing before it gets to a complaint, channeling the data from repairs requests, things like that, to try and really find where people are voicing their opinion and doing that outreach work with residents groups to try and find out what's going on. And part of that is a proactive communication strategy, engaging with residents so we put out a call for evidence, and we found that there wasn't much proactive communication. There is still this culture of thinking of complaints certainly as a bad thing, and when someone complains it's a negative. Now, yes, something's gone wrong, but actually what we want to see, high levels of complaints can be a sign of a really good proactive organization that's open to feedback, listening to resident feedback, acting on it. So we wanted to see that communication strategy. In terms of taking responsibility, we wanted to see, people being treated fairly, that not that blame going on to the resident of, well, obviously you're causing this issue, how can you fix this issue? Because what we saw was by the time the matter had reached us, by the time it had become a complaint, we had a very exacerbated resident who had tried everything within their gift and was still facing this brick wall of talking to the landlord, of saying, look, I really need your help here. There's nothing else I can do. One of the things we talk about lots, and it's a very dry issue, but it's a very fundamental issue to all of this, is really strong record keeping. What we found was a real lack of joined up approach between repairs teams, between contractors, between complaints teams, knowing what had happened and when it had happened, and knowing the history, the case history of a building, but also the case history of a resident. And so having that framework in place for the standard of record keeping that you expect from both your contractors, from your complaint staff, from your repair staff, so that when someone gets in touch and says they're having a problem, you can literally see the case history in front of you. You can see all the actions you've taken. Without good record keeping, you're very much just kind of working in the dark, working with one arm tied behind your back, trying to figure out what's going on. We talked about knowing your residents and knowing, things like occupancy factors, overcrowding, what the heating and ventilation systems are doing, individual circumstances like disability, financial hardship, health conditions. So understanding that, yes, obviously there will be a lot of themes and trends and similar causes to damp and mold, but every individual circumstance is different, and that acknowledgement and knowing your residents and the individual circumstances. We talked about focusing on fabric, and one of the things that we found in the report was this unintended consequence of net zero plans. So retrofitting and insulation was playing a part, but electrical heating more than gas heating, and this drive towards net zero was actually in some instances fueling the damp and mold problems. And so it's important to again have that joined up approach between what is your plan to get net zero, how is that going to impact the fabric of the building. Knowing your stock, so know what are the properties within your portfolio, what is the, and there will be similar types of properties, there will be similar types of problems in those properties. So collating all of that to make sure that you understand similar types of buildings, similar types of problems, so you can be proactive. So you can say, well, we know that this particular type of property suffers from this, and we know that this particular property suffers from this, and we know that this works. We know that this is a potential solution to this. So really a fabric based approach rather than a blaming residents based approach. And in terms of that zero tolerance culture, we wanted to see landlords have a damp and mold strategy. What is the plan? I was asked on another webinar recently, what do we do when we've done everything? And the answer was, well, you need to have a robust plan in place to make sure you are satisfied to the best of your knowledge that you have done everything. You need to have a strategy in place to look at those individual circumstances, to look at the fabric of the building and satisfy yourself that you've absolutely exhausted every avenue to try and resolve the issue, using things like void periods to get into buildings and carry out that work when you can, before then somebody else. We still see instances of properties being let with known problems, and yet still they're going back out, and then the problem just becomes exacerbated because there's somebody living there now. We talked about empowering staff to really tackle these issues. We looked, there was the Chartered Institute of Housing Professional Standards. We encouraged landlords to look at that when it came to staff, but also upskilling frontline staff to be able to diagnose these problems as best they can. Who is the first point of contact for when those reports of damp and mold come in, and what can be put in place to effectively get that to the right place, to get the right solution and get it to the right person. Encouraging staff to be flexible and adaptable, responding to situations as they emerge, so that they can get it to the right place. So that kind of upskilling as well. And of course, it won't surprise you to hear from the Housing Ombudsman that we encourage you to use the complaints process. Too often, the complaints process isn't talking to the rest of the organization. So what are the themes and trends coming out of the complaints coming to your organization? What are your residents saying through the complaints? Because complaints are the early warning sign of something going wrong. So an open, transparent complaints process can really tell you what's going on within your organization. And then you can channel that learning going forward to try and improve the process. So I've talked a lot about what was going wrong, but I also want to talk and focus on what's happened since then, because we recently issued a follow-up report to the damp and mold to kind of, in response to what's been going on over the last few months and the unfortunate events in Rochdale and other issues that have been in the media spotlight, and what is happening within the damp and mold area. And we're pleased to say that there is progress. So we are seeing, and we're going to hear about some of that today, and we are seeing landlords appoint specialist contractors with particular equipment, so things like thermal cameras to identify cold spots, looking at thermal bridging, all of these technological solutions, and that all are indicative of a proactive approach and not blaming the resident, but looking at that fabric-based approach. We've seen an increase in activity during void periods to work with specialist damp and mold contractors to address issues at the void stage to minimize that future impact. We've seen examples of landlords using humidity and temperature sensors to kind of try and predict mold growth in people's homes, flag when a property is at risk of mold growth, and using that data to understand and reduce, and in some instances eliminate mold growth. It might not always be possible, but it is possible to have a plan in place to manage and reduce. Lots of landlords have set up dedicated websites, dedicated portals for residents to report. We saw the introduction of a resident app solely for damp and mold. A video calling service was introduced in one instance for people to be able to film their property, a very easy way of using technology to look at the individual circumstances. And we looked at, and we've seen landlords introduce dashboards for what's going on, within damp and mold within their properties, so that they can look and have a risk-based approach to what's going on within the fabric of the properties. So there's lots of really positive things happening, since we issued the report, and these are all reflected in the follow-up report that we released earlier this year. Of course, there are still areas for concern, and I think most of these allude to still the kind of challenge we have around culture within some organizations and within the sector. So we said it's not lifestyle, and what we've seen is other words emerging that mean the same thing. So in one instance, we saw a landlord refer to, it's not lifestyle, but it might be internal environmental factors, which is another way of saying that it's lifestyle. So we would encourage that culture change to look not just at the residents' actions, but the fabric of the building. Go back to the original report. We looked at insufficient advice being taken when residents were coming in. So residents have been reporting issues and still not using those specialist damp and mold contractors, still not being able to accurately diagnose what is the best solution for this individual problem in this individual property. We've still found unrealistic expectations being placed on the residents. So we've seen guidance that includes words like, well, get yourself a mold remover kit, always keep your home warm, is one bit of guidance. Now, obviously, you're going to want to promote best practice within your properties, but there also needs to be an acknowledgement of the individual circumstances of the resident. And we still see a lack of engagement with residents. We saw a notable proportion of landlords who were still unaware of the damp and mold report that had been issued, or felt that it wasn't relevant to what they were doing in the space. And so we really want that engagement with the topic, with the theme, because that's how we address the issues going forward. So what are the priorities for damp and mold going forward? Well, one of the things that we recommended in the following follow-up report was we're still seeing some evidence of landlords hiding behind legal proceedings at times, rather than taking that proactive approach and looking to address the issue, and a lack of clarity sometimes over what constitutes legal proceedings. So sometimes an email might arrive and someone might say, well, I'm going to start taking legal action, and the landlord would stop doing everything. And our advice is always never stop trying to address the issue. It is only when something becomes inextricably linked to legal proceedings that have commenced that we would expect suddenly that consideration of what's appropriate, what's not, but ultimately should always be striving to address the issue and address it as early as possible. We've seen some good practice around treating residents fairly, that dignity, that respect, but we still see the word lifestyle creeping in, and we're still seeing the first action of landlords being to look at lifestyle as opposed to looking at the whole picture. Lifestyle, fabric of building, what the data, what the case evidence is telling you. And finally, we really want to start promoting good governance over these issues as well, because if we're trying to bring about a cultural change within an organization, it has to come from the top. So we would expect senior management, governing bodies to be aware of what the damp and mold strategy is. What is the plan? What are the complaints information telling you? What are the themes and trends emerging? Creating that culture within an organization of accountability, of being that kind of critical friend, of saying, well, could we go better in this area? What about this area? That comes from good governance, and it's far better to come from good governance than to come down the line when the Housing Ombudsman gets involved and we start asking exactly the same questions. What are you doing about this and what are you doing by that? You can create your own environment to challenge yourself to move further forward and address the issues that you're encountering. I'm going to hand over. I've talked for long enough now, and I'm happy to answer questions when we come to the end. But I'm now going to hand over to Sarah, who has kindly agreed to come and speak to us from Curo about her experience of what's been going on in the damp and mold space. I'll hand over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Alan. I'll just wait for my slides to pop up and then I'll get started. We're going to be doing our best Chris Whitty here with a bit of next slide, please. Fabulous, thank you. So in 10 minutes, really, I'm going to quickly talk you through what we did, what we learned, and what we changed. We started out with a review of our order book. We did a customer survey called Keeping You Warm and Well this winter, and we had an unprecedented response rate to that. 10% of our customers replied, which is way higher than what we would normally expect, and gave us a really good foundation to build off. We followed that up with in-depth interviews with a group of customers as well, so we could really understand some of the practical problems, but also the emotional impact it was having on them. And I also did quite a lot of desktop research on their health implications, which I haven't had time, we take too long to take you through that today. But if we go to the next slide, I think this is the one that will show it in a nutshell, why this work needs a degree of urgency. There's a lot of infrastructure and regulation around Legionella and gas, but actually damp and mould is far more likely to cause harm to your customers in their homes. And so it's really important to remember that and treat it as a health and safety issue. Next slide, please. So we started off, we really needed to understand customers' relationships with their home and how they were able to manage the heat in their home. And the data on here was taken pre the big hikes in cost. So this is probably February 2022. So it was just before the big April price increases. And so our baseline was that we had 15% of customers that were only able to heat one room. We had a smaller cohort of customers that were barely using any heating at all. But people were already very much cutting back on their energy use to try and make ends meet. Next slide, please. And I wanted to understand really how this interacted with health of customers. And so we asked if you had any health, do you have any health conditions that are affected by cold and damp? And lots of people did. And the ones that did have a health issue, 41% of the survey cohort said, yeah, actually there's someone in my house for whom damp and cold makes their health worse. And it was all the things you might expect. There was lots of chest problems, arthritis, circulatory problems, mental health issues that were all suffering because of poorly performing homes. So immediately that taught me that some health screening was going to be essential in what we did next. Next slide, please. So we wanted to know, well, how does it affect you? And again, caused lots of pain, made asthma worse, recurrent chest infections, stiffness, and for a lot of customers, this was like a catch-22 situation where their pain was increasing, so they were moving about less, then their mobility deteriorated, and then they were getting in more pain, and so on and so forth. So it was difficult for them to break the cycle. We were able to project that maybe we had 800 customers who had a home that was poorly performing, they had an issue with affordability, and they had a health issue going on at the same time. So something of a toxic trio. And that has gone on to help us prioritise our work and how we allocate cases moving forward. Next slide, please. We looked at our order book, and what it told us was that we weren't working effectively. The demand had been fairly steady, but the costs were racking up, and we just weren't investing effectively to make a real difference. So we were maybe keeping on top of things, but we weren't, we were treating symptoms rather than finding the actual cause of the problem. So too quick to look to ventilation measures when we hadn't found what the underlying issue was. And we were doing a lot of reactive work. Next slide, please. And we knew that people were starting to lose faith in that they weren't reporting. And we could see when we asked that where we had done work, it was solving the problem some of the time or making it less bad, but it wasn't completely curative. And so a really important thing to establish when you look at this is, what is your definition of done? At what point do you say this customer's reported a problem, we've gone and we've investigated and we've solved it? Because that was lacking in our systems on our process, and has gladly been changed now, but you really need to work out what that is. So for us, we're probably going to be we'll be making contacts sort of 3 weeks, 3 months, and later in the year, just to check across seasons that the work we've done has been effective. We will cut down on repeat demand by doing that. So although it's more work, hopefully it's more of the good kind of work rather than the waste value work where something's gone wrong. Next slide, please. So we had to be really honest with ourselves and confront some difficult truths. And we didn't have a proper customer journey for this. You cannot manage damp and mould off a bunch of works orders. The communication is not robust enough. You'll forget things, people won't get chased up, followed up, all those sorts of things. And that certainly came out in our conversations with customers. They were absolutely craving personal accountability. Our trades colleagues wanted to do more, but couldn't. But I think the biggest thing for me that came out was we needed to make a major improvement in the quality of our surveying. We were too quick to jump to ventilation as a solution when we hadn't properly diagnosed the problem. And that had become too much of a norm. And because of that, we hadn't built up a data bank of what goes on in different build types and what are going to be the best programs to address this. We think everyone has underestimated the role that fuel poverty was playing, but we don't want that to become the new normal default conclusion. And so really we set about breaking this cycle so that poor conditions weren't keeping people chronically unwell. So next slide, please. So from all the learnings, we came up with a big plan, and I don't have time to take you through all of these, but these are all the work streams that we identified. So very much a whole business approach. There is something in it for almost every colleague in our business. And if you want more information about any of that, then please do get in touch. But it's a really comprehensive program that's ongoing. Next slide, please. Just a couple of the highlights. So one thing we did was a dashboard that pulls all the history together in a news feed, because we had information in various bits of our system. So it was very difficult for colleagues to understand the backstory. We've now got before and after surveys, including photos, thermal images, measurements, readings. These are all shared with the customer at the point they're filled in, so they can see what it looked like before and what it looks like now, and the difference that we've made between two thermal images, for example. And our triage and risk rating combine the property condition and the person's needs, so that we understand that a low-level problem with a severe health issue is maybe a higher priority than just looking at the property alone. And we've got a case management workflow in place now with dedicated contact points for customers. We've got a dashboard for open orders, which is absolutely a game changer, and it means the admin support teams can see which things have gone red in a work tray and are picking up stuff that surveyors can't get to because they're out on visits, etc., etc. So we're not missing stuff. Next slide, please. Now, the hardest bit of all has been the transition from our old way of doing things to our new. So we've built all our new gizmos and done a lot of that work, but keep watching your complaints, because our focus now is very much on cutting out end-to-end time at every chance we can in our new process. We've dedicated training for our contact centre using pictures and all sorts of things. We're about to set up a dedicated IVR, so it'd be press 1 for damp and mould. We've had a big blob of orders because the demand shot up after the tragedy in Rochdale. And so we've had to move about some of our surveyor resource to get through that. And we're looking at maybe having some dedicated specialist cleaners for mould washes, because it's not working perfectly with our DLO at the moment. So we're just trying to pick out every bit of waste time we can possible. And we've also reorganised our admin teams into a single admin hub. So they've got much better oversights of orders, and there's greater flexibility within the workforce to support when things get busy. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, and I'm just going to talk about what's next for Curo. And we've changed our stock investment approach now to a whole house approach. And we've had to reorganise our programmes a bit to accommodate that. So we have delayed some decorations, and we have extended some component lifestyles where we thought it was okay to do that. And customers have supported that approach through 3 surveys that we've done, all telling us that they now prioritise thermal comfort ahead of kitchens, bathrooms, and those sorts of components. So we've used our data to target our worst estates as best we can. Our data isn't perfect, but it does keep the construction types that we're working on at any one time low, and enables us to build up a picture of common issues and common solutions for that build type. We are still doing reactive stuff as well, and we'll be constantly balancing those 2 things. But I'm going to end there. I think I've done my 10 minutes and given you a quick whistle-stop tour through what we've been able to do so far.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really interesting. So thank you very much for that. Right, we're going to move on to Louise from Coastline now. Over to you, Louise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan, and really interesting, Sarah. Slightly perhaps different approach to the one that we've taken at Coastline. So it's really good to hear the differences. Just a little bit really about Coastline. First of all, we're based in Cornwall. We've got about 5,000 homes across Cornwall, primarily in the west. So as you can imagine, we have quite a lot of challenges from the weather. It's quite wet, fairly warm most of the time, and that does give us the need really to have quite new approach and new thinking. Don't know about everybody else, but since the all of the news and all of the publications about the sad death of Arab, we have been experiencing about 5 calls on average a day from customers, and you know, the spread of those calls and the context are quite extreme, and sometimes it's a little bit of condensation running down the window and the need to wipe a windowsill to actually a much bigger issue. So I'm just going to start and talk to you a little bit about how we manage our assets and our approach from a stock, and then move on to talk about all the work we've been doing with our customers, and our approach to really understanding our customer base. So in terms of our stock, we made the decision about 6 years ago to bring in our stock condition surveying and to run a 5-year programme with our own in-house stock condition surveyors that we went out and recruited. And all of our homes will be visited on a cyclical ongoing basis. We're in year sort of 4.5 at the moment, and so we have some really good robust data on our stock. We've completed about 93% at this point, and so are on track. And we tackled some of our homes that had the oldest surveys that were done externally previously, and we've also tackled the hard to access homes and used the injunction process where we've needed to in those initial years. We look at all aspects of the housing health and safety rating criteria as we do our surveys, and feed all of that data, including damp and mould and excess cold, into our stock database. And I think one of the real benefits of bringing our surveying in-house has enabled us to get really detailed information and photographs from inside the home. But as part of the work that our surveyors do with our customers is to seek out whether customers are experiencing any issues when they're in the home, and to ask them if they have any repairs, talk to them about any issues that they see. And on average, we found initially that we were getting between 2 and 3 additional repairs that the stock condition surveyors were picking up that the customer just hadn't reported or hadn't got around to reporting. So that caused us an increase in terms of our repairs and how we manage that initially. One of the things that we've done is looked at our kitchen and bathroom specification some years ago and extended those specifications to include extractor fans in both kitchen and bathroom as standard. And all of our staff have been proactively trained on dealing with HHSRS assessments, and all new colleagues are trained as well. And we've also been providing some professional damp and mould training so that all of our colleagues are able to identify hazards within the homes. I will just move on because time is of the essence. And really, quite interestingly, we took part in a project that was EU funded with the University of Exeter, Cornwall Council and Health. And as part of that study, it involved the development of sensors to go in approximately 180 of our customers' homes who were willing volunteers, and the sensors monitored the temperature within the property, both the internal and the external environment. And what we were able to do was to identify patterns and trends as to when there were abnormal drops in temperature within the home or increased humidity. And it would show different trends as people were coming home from work, or if they were cooking dinner for the family. And so we were able to deal with those trends and the information that those sensors were giving us in a really proactive way. And we supported customers through hardship payments. We found that people perhaps weren't using their heating, or the heating was broken. Some of them were being charged extreme costs incorrectly, and even to the point of one customer hadn't got the wasn't ventilating the bedroom because the latch was broken and the cat was getting out. So we were able to go and fix the latch and solve that problem for her in that room. So that gave us some really interesting additional stock information, as well as how people and our customers were living in our homes. In terms of knowing our customers in the wider sense, we started 2 years ago to do mould surveys to our customers quite proactively to say, are you experiencing any issues within your home? What are those issues? And then following those responses up with visits to those customers. And at the same time, we engaged a specialist company to commission to go out and survey where we had issues within those homes, and carry out specialist remedial works as appropriate. And that included doing follow-up visits. And I think to date we've managed to do just under 2,000 specialist surveys across our 5,000 homes. And some of those things have been where fans were broken or weren't effective and needed replacing, customers needing support. We've found a number of properties where we had hoarding, and we supported those customers in managing their mental health and well-being as part of that hoarding. I think where we then went on to was to really work with our customer scrutiny group, who did a scrutiny of our approach to dealing with damp and mould back in 2021. And with their findings, they made lots of recommendations on areas where we could improve. And those were areas around information not necessarily being accessible for everyone with certain needs. There weren't images, there was lots of written detail. And what they were saying was that, yes, we felt we were communicating on damp and mould, but actually our communication wasn't very good at all from our customer perspective. So we work with our customer engagement and scrutiny group to address those issues. And then last year, in November, they did a follow-up on the scrutiny and mystery shop to check all of the information that we had available on our website, in our magazine, in our customer portal, social media, etc., and all of our correspondence. And they were checking how we were explaining the issues, how we would manage our response to customer issues, and what they could expect, along with kind of how we manage disrepair claims, etc. And the feedback from our customers was really positive, although they didn't feel that we'd addressed everything. And since then, we've finalised those few outstanding pieces with our customers. We record every contact with the customer and set that up as a case, and we follow up and visit where we've done surveys and remedials at specific points in time. We've also worked with customers where we do our community standard inspections regularly in our neighbourhoods, and we visit our homes. We go out fully branded as Coastline, and whilst we're out and about in our neighbourhoods, we knock on doors and talk to customers about any repairs or issues that they're experiencing, and try and really encourage customers to talk to us about issues and engage with us. I think a lot of vulnerable customers quite often see a barrier in engaging and being understood and really listened to, so that's been a real point of emphasis for us. And we have a special page set up, and our customers have done a series of videos. I think there's 5 videos in total, where you will see our customers talking about how we work with them and support them in damp and mould. So really proud to have been able to launch those videos, and having that whole process being driven by our customers. But we do feel that we need to do more. I mentioned at the start that we're getting on average 5 calls a day. So we have thought about how also with our external company struggling to cope and manage with the workload. So we've just appointed an in-house expert that starts with us in April, and we're going to be building an in-house team to carry out some of those remedial works to work alongside that specialist company. We've changed the paint specification when we do our void works in our homes, and to really tackle those any damp and mould issues when those properties are void. The same as Sarah mentioned, we've got a lovely dashboard set up so we can see exactly how many reports and cases and visits and remedial works that we need to do. And really the decision from the board really and right the way through to the front line to create that in-house team is so that we can gear up to meet the timescales that are likely to be legislated through our ABS law, because we're not as prompt as we would like to be using an external company and are reliant on their capacity at the moment. So I think that was a very quick whistle stop, and that's my update. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. I can see that the chat has been full of lots of questions and comments. So we are going to attempt to get through some of that in the short period of time that we have. So let me just bring up, what am I bringing up? I've got the chat there.
Did you want me just to jump in and just ask questions of the 3 of you?
That would be very helpful, Mark. Thank you very much.
No worries at all. No worries. We'll start with Sarah. How can you be confident that you've captured all customer health issues, and how do you plan to keep that updated?
It's difficult. We know that we've got a shortage of information on pre-existing health issues and disabilities. So we actively have been doing comms and whatnot to customers and offering various incentives for people to go on and update their personal data, so that we've already got a baseline before the call comes in. But it's just about asking the question in your triage, And there's lots of things in this business that we triage, and health is becoming an increasingly important component. And obviously people's health conditions vary. They may get better, they may get worse, and I can't say hand on heart that it will all be 100% up to date all of the time. But if you ask at those important moments, those moments of truth when the customer needs you to be there for them and understand that and plan around that, then you're going to be doing the right things. Someone that is fitting well and at work all day is going to have a very different set of needs to someone who is at home with chronic COPD. And so when you're planning your works, that's the kind of stuff that you need to think about.
Thanks, Sarah. The next question is for both you and Louise, so don't mind who jumps in first, but it's about budgets and expenditures because of the increased damp and mould works. Have you managed more with less, or has this been the result of increased investment, and have you had to increase staffing as well?
Yes and yes. It has cost more, and we have had to increase staffing. We have put some additional funding in for this coming year to get on top of the sort of spike that we had post Rochdale, but we have also extended the life cycle of some of our components and delayed some decorations to accommodate this, because it was a clear priority from 3 customer surveys. And we've been very open about that. All of that information is on our website.
Yeah, and from my perspective, in terms of manage it internally, we haven't increased resources. However, financially, we have seen the cost of completing the specialist surveys and the works almost quadruple, and part of our decision-making process to recruit an internal expert and to develop our own team to carry out remedials is to try and manage that cost within our annual programs, and also to have better oversight and more control over that. So staffing wise, we will be increasing our repairs team to have that specialist team, but we will reduce costs in terms of all of the externals at the moment that are being done, because we're seeing our specialist company deal with things that actually we don't necessarily need a specialist to go to.
Thank you. Alan, a couple of questions for you, both around the lifestyle element of the report. Does the approach of not questioning lifestyle absolve customers of all responsibility, and how do landlords balance that shared responsibility between tenant and landlord on damp and mould? And then a kind of supplementary question with that as well is, how is it best to answer a customer's complaint if there are some lifestyle factors at play?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot of the time with this report, and we're aware that it caused some ripples when we called the report It's Not Lifestyle. Where we're coming from on that is what we encountered was a culture that it was always lifestyle. What we encountered was, the immediate response of landlords was to question the residents' lifestyle and the residents' actions, as opposed to looking at all factors. So absolutely, lifestyle may be part of the jigsaw puzzle and the diagnostic that you're putting together. But what we want landlords to be able to do is satisfy themselves that that they have addressed every single possible, underlying cause. So yes, the resident might be drying their clothes on a radiator in the house, but that might not, that doesn't, the causality of that is not that has led to the damp and mold. It may be a completely different issue. And what we encountered was culture of it is always the resident. And what we are saying is that actually what you need to be doing is looking at the whole picture in the round, the fabric of the building, all of the things that your intelligence is telling you. Now, by the time I had a question earlier today about what do we do when we've exhausted all of that and we still think, and this is the question that came out, we still think that it is the resident's lifestyle. And I think it's about an evidence-based approach. So if you have satisfied yourself that you have done everything within your power and the resident continues to do things which you believe are causing damp and mold, then there's an education element to it about how do you educate the resident of what they are doing, the causality of what they're doing is causing the damp and mold. But it's also that robust record keeping as well. It's absolutely making sure that you've got the robust evidence based of what you have done, what you're going to plan to do going forward, so that by the time it comes to us and we're saying, well, can you tell us what you've done? Can you tell us how have you satisfied yourself? We're acting from a robust evidence base and not just an assumption that it is the resident's lifestyle.
Thank you. Another question for Sarah and Louise. Have either of the organisations identified the main causes of damp and mould where you have discovered it, and have they been linked back to a failure of day-to-day repairs or a lack of investment?
A bit of both. I've just put my list in the chat. We don't have a gutter clearance programme. We have now, because that was an issue. Lots of problems with render, roof leaks, finding cavity fill failures, loft insulation not going right up to the edges. Extraction is a big issue. Most of the extractors we've tested don't meet the current building regs. And then we need something more robust in there that's humidity controlled rather than controlled by a light. Lots more heating than we expected, wasn't well specified. The radiators were too small for the rooms that they were in. There's been all sorts of things, and also we've got a lot of old council flats with a ring beam construction that just cold bridge all day long. So it's all those sorts of things. And where it's just lifestyle, that is, truth be told, it's the absolute minority. Very, very few situations where there actually wasn't an issue with how the block or the flats was performing. There's stuff that the customer can do to help, for sure, but rarely have we found it to be the absolute root cause. There's been something wrong that needed addressing.
And I think from our perspective, I would agree that we found issues around cavity failures where we'd upgraded homes. We had gaps in loft insulation quite often that doesn't go right to the edge and can quite often cause issues. We've had extractor fans that we found that haven't been working, where sometimes they've been disconnected or taped up, sometimes by the customer, but also some that hadn't been reported when they weren't working, that we needed to get repaired or replaced with new ones. But we've also found, I think, issues in some of our new development homes, and that's mainly around the property drying out because of the climate and the turnaround time frame. So it's being mindful of making sure that those new homes are managed properly and effectively. But we have been quite successful in the past in some major investment in our homes. So actually the majority of our homes are in reasonably good condition. So it's quite often something's happened. We did have some flats, as Sarah mentioned, where we didn't have a gutter clearance program, a cyclical program, and we do have now as well. So a real mix, I think, of those different elements.
Thank you, Louise. I appreciate that everyone's got kind of busy diaries and we're going to have to jump off now. There's been loads of other questions in the chat. And what I'll say is that what we'll do is we'll take all of those questions and get them answered for you. And then we'll send it out with the slides and the recording as well. So just say thank you, everyone, for coming, and a massive thank you to Louise, Alan and Sarah for their presentations and their time this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Mark, if I could just jump in and say that a lot of the questions as well will be answered in our follow-up report. So I saw a question about legal proceedings. Please do read the follow-up report on our website, because it will answer a lot of the questions that have been in the chat as well.
Thank you. And we'll put a link to that as well with everything that we send over.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Great. Thanks very much. Nice to chat. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.